The ICU at Asan Medical Center smelled of disinfectant and desperation when young Lee's mother grabbed his tattooed wrist and rasped 4 words that would detonate his life. "I want her." He followed her trembling finger past the crash cart, past the dialysis machine, to the American nurse, reviewing charts by the window, blonde hair catching the harsh fluorescent light, blue scrubs, hiding capable shoulders, and a jawline that suggested she didn't take orders from men like him. "Want her for what, Uma?" he asked, though dread already coiled in his gut. His mother's grip tightened with startling strength. "For you, younga, promise me. Before I die, I want to know you'll have someone." And just like that, the man who'd ordered executions over bibimbap felt something he thought he'd buried with his father 15 years ago. Fear. If you want to know how a dying mother's final wish transformed a ruthless kingpin into something far more dangerous, a man in love, then hit that subscribe button right now. Because what happens next will show you that some promises are worth burning entire empires to keep. Don't miss a second of this. Let's dive in. The cardiac monitors in room 702 beeped their mechanical rhythm at 3:47 a.m., the hour when Seoul's nightlife died and the predators went to ground. Young Lee sat motionless in the visitor's chair, his Patek Philippe Nautilus catching the sterile light, his Tom Ford suit a dark slash against the medical white. At 32, he controlled the Baco faction logistics routes that moved everything customs didn't check. Real estate portfolios that sanitized cash faster than politicians could spend it, and enforcers who understood that loyalty wasn't negotiable. But none of that mattered here. His mother, the woman who'd raised him alone after his father died in a rival faction's ambush, who'd never asked where the money came from as long as he stayed alive, lay in the hospital bed. Her breathing labored, her once commanding voice reduced to whispers. Heart failure, progressive, terminal. The fluorescent lights in the ICU hummed their mechanical lullaby at 11:47 p.m. Sarah Chen had worked the night shift at Memorial General for 6 years, long enough to know that the real stories didn't happen during visiting hours. They happened in the quiet spaces between midnight and dawn, when families thought no one was watching. Room 702 had become a point of fascination among the younger nurses. They'd cluster near the medication cart, voices dropping to theatrical whispers whenever the elevator doors opened at the end of the hall. "He's here," someone would murmur, and heads would turn to watch the tall figure with the neck tattoos make his way past the nurse's station without asking permission. Sarah had no patience for gossip. She'd seen too many families break apart in these sterile corridors to waste time judging anyone who showed up. The tattooed man, young Lee, according to the chart, had been coming every night for 3 weeks. Same time. Same routine. He'd nod at whoever was behind the desk, slip into his mother's room, and settle into that god-awful vinyl chair that had probably been designed as a medieval torture device. Tonight, she found him exactly where she expected. The chair was pulled close to the bed, his body folded into an awkward angle that would leave him hobbled by morning. His mother, Sunmi Lee, lay motionless, except for the shallow rise and fall of her chest. The monitors beeped their steady rhythm, the only proof that life still flickered inside her failing body. Sarah didn't knock. In the ICU, privacy was a luxury no one could afford. She moved to the IV stand with practiced efficiency, her fingers already calculating the morphine adjustment misses. Lee would need to stay ahead of the pain. "You're going to wreck your back sleeping like that," Sarah said, not looking at him. Young stirred, blinking against the harsh light from the hallway. His neck tattoos caught the fluorescent's intricate patterns that probably meant something to someone, somewhere. To Sarah, they just meant he'd made choices. Everyone did. "I'm not sleeping," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "You were snoring." "That's not snoring. That's breathing loudly." Sarah allowed herself the ghost of a smile as she checked the morphine drip, then made a note on the tablet. Mrs. Lee's numbers were holding, which was the best anyone could hope for at this stage. The cancer had spread too far, moved too fast. Now it was just a matter of keeping her comfortable while her body decided how much more fight it had left. "How long since you've been home?" Sarah asked. Young rubbed his face with both hands. "I don't know. Tuesday? Today is Friday. Then Tuesday." Sarah finally looked at him directly. He was younger than she'd initially thought, maybe 30, 32. The tattoos and the permanent exhaustion etched into his features had added years that didn't belong to him yet. His clothes were rumpled but clean, and there was a small duffel bag tucked under the chair. He'd been living out of it, she realized. Coming here straight from wherever he worked, staying until morning, then starting all over again. "Your mother needs you functional, not collapsed on her floor," Sarah said. "That chair isn't a bed. It's fine. It's vinyl and spite. You want to be here when she wakes up. Go home. Sleep. Come back tomorrow." Young's jaw tightened. She might need something. "Then I'll give it to her. That's literally my job." Sarah softened her voice, just slightly. "Mr. Lee, I've been doing this a long time. The families who burn themselves out in week 3, they're not here for the goodbye. Don't be that story." He stared at his mother's face, and Sarah saw what she'd seen 100 times before the weight of guilt that came with leaving, even for a few hours. As if walking away from the hospital room meant abandoning ship, admitting defeat, accepting the inevitable. "She raised me by herself," Young said quietly. "Worked 2 jobs, never missed a parent-teacher conference, never forgot to pack lunch. She was at every baseball game I played in high school, even the away ones. She'd drive 2 hours after a double shift just to watch me sit on the bench." Sarah had heard variations of this speech before. Good parents, absent parents, complicated parents. Everyone had a reason for keeping vigil, for refusing to leave even when there was nothing left to do but wait. "Then honor her by taking care of yourself," Sarah said. She adjusted the blanket around Mrs. Lee's shoulders, checking the catheter line and oxygen feed with automatic precision. "You think she'd want you destroying your health? Sleeping in chairs? Living out of a gym bag?" "She'd tell me to go home," Young admitted. "Smart woman. Stubborn woman. Wonder where you got it from?" Sarah made one final notation on the tablet, then turned to leave. At the door, she paused. "I'm here until 7 a.m. If anything changes anything at all, you'll know before you make it to the parking garage. I promise." Young nodded slowly, the fight draining out of him. "Okay. Say it like you mean it." "Okay. I'll go home." Sarah left him there, watching his mother breathe, counting down the minutes before he could justify staying just a little bit longer. The other nurses would whisper tomorrow about how he finally left before sunrise. They'd speculate about where he went, whether he had family waiting, what those neck tattoos really meant. Sarah wouldn't whisper. She'd just adjust the morphine drip and make sure Mrs. Lee stayed comfortable the way she did for everyone who ended up in room 702. The monitor's flatline scream tore through the ICU at 3:47 a.m., and Sarah was already moving before the alarm finished its first cycle. Her hands found his mother's chest with the practiced certainty of someone who'd done this 1,000 times, compressions falling into that brutal rhythm that separates the living from the dead. Young Lee stood frozen in the doorway, watching this woman he barely knew fight death itself for his mother, her ponytail swinging with each thrust, her voice cutting through chaos with commands that made seasoned nurses jump. 2 minutes felt like 2 hours. The monitor hiccuped, caught, then settled into an irregular but living rhythm. Sarah's shoulders dropped half an inch, the only sign she'd been holding tension at all. She adjusted the IV drip with steady hands, while other nurses scurried around her, but Young Lee saw it, the tiny tremor in her fingers as she stepped back, the way she pressed them briefly against her thigh to still them. His mother's eyes fluttered open 20 minutes later. The oxygen mask fogged with her shallow breaths, but those eyes were sharp, harder than he'd seen them in weeks. They found him immediately, then cut to Sarah checking the monitors one last time before her shift ended. "Come here." His mother's voice rasped through the mask, barely audible. Young Lee moved to her bedside, expecting the usual reassurances, the brave face she'd worn through every treatment, every setback. Instead, her hand shot out and clamped around his wrist with shocking strength. Her fingers dug into his pulse point hard enough to hurt. "Listen to me." She pulled the oxygen mask down with her other hand, ignoring the immediate protest from the machines. "I don't have time for your stubborn pride. Mom, you need to rest. I want her for you." The words came out crystal clear, no room for misinterpretation. Her eyes locked onto his with an intensity that killed any thought of arguing. That girl, Sarah. Young Lee felt the floor tilt slightly. "You're not thinking clearly." The medication. Her grip tightened until he felt his bones grind. "I just died for 2 minutes, boy. I'm thinking clearer than I have in years." She glanced toward the hallway where Sarah had disappeared. "She fought for me like I was her own mother. You think I didn't see how she looked at you when you brought me that blanket? How you watched her when you thought no one noticed? Mom, she's my employee. This is inappropriate." "Inappropriate?" His mother's laugh turned into a cough, but she waved away his concern. "What's inappropriate is you throwing away a woman like that because you're too proud to see what's right in front of you. I watched her tonight. The way she commanded that room, the way she refused to let me go even when that machine said I was gone." Her voice dropped to something almost fierce. "That's the kind of woman who fights for what matters, who doesn't give up when things get hard." Young Lee tried to pull his wrist free, but her grip was iron. She's a nurse doing her job. She's a woman who ran toward death when everyone else hesitated. His mother's breathing was getting labored, but she pushed through. "I've seen a lot of nurses in this place. Good ones, mediocre ones, ones just collecting a paycheck. She's different. She sees people, not patients. She saw you. You don't understand the situation. I understand I'm dying." The bluntness of it hit like a slap. "I understand I won't see you married, won't meet my grandchildren, won't be there when you finally stop punishing yourself for your father's choices and let yourself be happy." Her eyes glistened, but her voice stayed steady. "So I'm going to say what I need to say while I still can. That girl is worth 100 of those society women your grandmother keeps parading through. She's real. She's strong. And whether you want to admit it or not, she already cares about you." This is crazy. But even as young Lee said it, he felt something crack in his chest. "She doesn't even know me. Then let her." His mother finally released his wrist, her hand falling back to the bed exhausted. "Promise me you'll try. Not for some business arrangement, not for appearances. Really try. Talk to her like she's not just staff. Let her see past that wall you've built. And if she's not interested?" The question came out quieter than he intended. His mother smiled, and for a moment she looked like herself again, sharp, knowing, impossible to fool. "She brought you coffee 3 times during her shift tonight. Each time she thought you weren't looking. The last one she made exactly how you take it, even though you never told her." She reached up and touched his face with a gentleness that made his throat tight. "She's already interested, you stubborn fool. The question is whether you're brave enough to do something about it." The machines beeped their steady rhythm. Somewhere down the hall, a phone rang. Young Lee stood there with his mother's hand against his cheek, feeling the weight of her words settle into his bones like truth he'd been avoiding. "I don't know how," he finally admitted. "Start by seeing her." His mother's thumb brushed his cheekbone once before her hand fell away. "Really seeing her. Not as a nurse, not as staff, as Sarah. The woman who just brought me back from the dead and looked more terrified after than she did during." Her eyes drifted closed, exhaustion finally claiming her. "Promise me." Young Lee watched her breathing even out, watched the monitors stabilize into their normal patterns. Through the window, dawn was starting to break over the city, painting everything in shades of gold and gray. "I promise," he whispered. His mother's lips curved into a small smile without opening her eyes, and young Lee wondered if this moment standing in the aftermath of death barely avoided Making a promise to a dying woman about a girl who fought too hard for strangers was the beginning of something he couldn't possibly understand yet. Young Lee stood in the doorway of his mother's room, watching Sarah adjust the IV drip with practiced efficiency. The fluorescent lights caught the exhaustion in her eyes, the kind that came from too many double shifts and not enough sleep. "Miss Carter," his voice cut through the quiet hum of medical equipment. She didn't turn immediately, finishing her adjustment first. Professional to the core. "Mr. Lee, your mother's vitals are stable. The night nurse will be. Have dinner with me." Now she turned, confusion flickering across her face. "Excuse me? Tonight, there's a restaurant 2 blocks from here. We need to discuss my mother's care plan." He kept his tone businesslike, though he'd rehearsed this conversation 3 times in the parking lot. Sarah's polite smile didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Lee, I appreciate the offer, but hospital policy doesn't really encourage. I'm not asking as a patient's son trying to influence care." He stepped further into the room, careful to keep his distance. In Seoul, proximity meant power. Here, it seemed to mean the opposite. "I'm asking because you're the only person who's been honest with me about her condition." She studied him for a long moment, and Young felt an unfamiliar sensation being genuinely evaluated rather than feared or obeyed. "I have a shift at County General in 4 hours," she said finally. "But thank you." "No." The word hung in the air between them like something physical. Young couldn't remember the last time someone had declined a direct request from him. His associates in Seoul would have laughed at the very concept. People didn't say no to young Lee. They said, "Yes, sir," and "right away," and "whatever you need." "Tomorrow, then," he pressed. "I'll work around your schedule." "Mr. Lee." Sarah's voice was patient but firm, the same tone he'd heard her use with confused elderly patients. "I understand you're concerned about your mother, and that's admirable, but I'm her nurse, not a consultant. If you have questions about her care, I'm happy to answer them here, during visiting hours, in a professional context." She was dismissing him, politely, professionally, but unmistakably. Young felt something shift in his chest, part frustration, part fascination. What if it wasn't about my mother? The words came out before his strategic mind could stop them. Sarah's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Wariness, maybe, or recognition of what he was really asking. Then I'd have even less reason to say yes, wouldn't I? She moved past him toward the door, her scrubs rustling softly. Young caught the faint scent of hospital antiseptic and something else, vanilla, maybe, or honey. Human underneath the clinical. "Wait," he turned. "I have a proposition. Mr. Lee, double your salary." The words came out sharp, tactical. Business was territory, he understood. "Be my mother's private nurse, full-time. Whatever schedule works for you. Name your terms." Sarah stopped, her hand on the door frame. She didn't turn around immediately, and Young felt a flicker of hope. Money talked in every language. It was the universal translator. When she did face him, her expression was unreadable. "You're offering to hire me away from the hospital?" "Yes." "To care exclusively for your mother?" "Yes." "For double what I make now. Double your current salary at both hospitals." "I know you work 2 jobs." That got a reaction surprise, quickly masked. Good. He'd done his research. Knowledge was leverage. "How do you know that?" Her voice was quieter now, something guarded creeping in. "I make it my business to know who's caring for my mother." Not quite a lie. He'd made 1 phone call to hospital administration, asked a few pointed questions. Easy. Sarah crossed her arms, and Young recognized the gesture from countless negotiations. She was calculating, weighing options. He'd won. Money always won. "No." The word hit him like a physical blow. "What?" "No, Mr. Lee. I appreciate the offer, but I'm not interested. You haven't even heard the full terms. Health insurance, housing if you need it, retirement. I don't care about the terms." There was something almost sad in her voice now, like she was explaining something obvious to a child. I'm a nurse because I care about patients. All of them. Not just the ones who can afford to buy my time exclusively." Young stared at her, genuinely speechless for the first time in years. In his world, everything had a price. Loyalty, silence, cooperation, everything. You just had to find the right number, the right leverage point. "Everyone has a price," he said, though the words felt hollow even as he spoke them. Sarah's smile was gentle, almost pitying. "Maybe in your world, Mr. Lee, but not in mine." She paused at the door. "Your mother's medication schedule is on her chart. The night nurse's name is Patricia. She's excellent. Get some sleep. You look like you need it." Then she was gone, leaving Young standing alone in his mother's hospital room, surrounded by the soft beeping of monitors and the ghost of vanilla-scented defiance. He'd faced down gang leaders in Busan, negotiated with corrupt politicians who had armies at their disposal, stared into the eyes of men who would kill him without hesitation and made them back down. But he'd never met anyone like Sarah Carter. Someone who looked at everything he could offer: money, security, stability, and simply walked away. For the first time since arriving in America, young Lee smiled. Not the cold, calculated expression he wore in negotiations. A real smile. This was going to be interesting. Young Lee waited outside the cafe in Itaewon like a man who'd never had to wait for anything in his life. The autumn wind cut through the narrow street, carrying the smell of roasted coffee and street food, and he kept checking his watch even though he'd arrived 20 minutes early. Pathetic. He was pathetic, and he knew it, but he couldn't make himself leave. When Sarah finally appeared at the end of the block, something in his chest loosened and tightened at the same time. She wore jeans and a cream sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, and she looked so completely out of place among the designer boutiques and luxury cars that it made him want to laugh. Or cry. He wasn't sure which. "You're late," he said when she reached him. "You're early." She adjusted her bag on her shoulder. "And before you get any ideas, I'm only here because your mother asked me to keep an eye on you. She seems to think you need supervision." "My mother asked you to—" He stopped, then laughed despite himself. "Of course she did." Sarah's expression remained carefully neutral. "She worries about you. Says you don't eat properly when you're working late." "I eat fine. That's not what the kitchen staff says." Young Lee pulled open the cafe door, gesturing for her to enter first. "You've been gossiping about me with the kitchen staff?" "I work in the kitchen, Mr. Lee. It's called conversation, not gossip." The cafe was one of those aggressively minimalist places that charged $15 for a latte and called it art. Floor-to-ceiling windows, concrete floors, plants hanging from exposed ceiling beams. Young Lee hated it too trendy, too aware of its own coolness, but it was neutral territory. Somewhere Sarah might actually feel comfortable. The barista's eyes widened when they approached the counter. A flicker of recognition, quickly suppressed. "Mr. Lee, welcome back. Your usual?" Sarah glanced at him, one eyebrow raised. "You have a usual? Here? I like coffee." He turned to Sarah. "What do you want?" "Just an Americano. Nothing fancy." "Make it 2, Young Lee said to the barista. "And whatever pastries you're serving today?" "Right away, sir." They found a table by the window, and Sarah sat with her back straight, hands folded in her lap like she was at a job interview. The carefully maintained distance between them felt like a physical wall. "So," Sarah said after a moment, "your mother says you work too much. What is it you do exactly? I've never actually asked." The lie came easily. He'd told it so many times it barely felt like lying anymore. Import and export, logistics, mostly, moving products between markets, managing supply chains. It's boring work. Lots of spreadsheets and conference calls. Sounds busy. It is. He leaned back in his chair, trying to appear casual. "What about you? Have you always worked in kitchens?" Sarah's expression softened slightly. "Since I was 16. My mother was a cook, so I grew up around food. After she died, it felt like the only thing I knew how to do well." "I'm sorry about your mother." It was a long time ago. She looked out the window at the street. But thank you. The barista arrived with their coffee and a plate of delicate pastries that probably cost more than Sarah made in a day. Young Lee watched her take a careful sip of her Americano, saw the way her eyes closed briefly in appreciation. Good? He asked. Very good. She set the cup down. Though I could make better. I don't doubt it. A server passed their table, and young Lee saw the subtle bow, the deference in the way the young man's shoulders angled slightly downward. Sarah saw it too. He caught the brief flicker in her eyes, quickly hidden. She pretended not to notice, reaching for a pastry instead. These are beautiful, she said, examining the delicate layers. Whoever made them knows what they're doing. My company works with a lot of premium suppliers, young Lee said, building on the lie. I've learned to appreciate quality. Import and export, Sarah repeated, and there was something in her tone he couldn't quite read. That's very general. What do you mean? Nothing. It's just funny. She took a bite of the pastry. You'd think someone in logistics would have more specific details to share. Types of products, shipping routes, that sort of thing. Young Lee's pulse quickened. She was testing him. Or maybe she already knew. Mostly high-end consumer goods, electronics, fashion, some specialty foods. We focus on luxury markets. Luxury markets. Sarah nodded slowly. That makes sense. Why does that make sense? Because everywhere you go, people treat you like royalty. Did you see that server? He practically bowed. She met his eyes directly. They don't do that for people in logistics. The air between them grew taut. Young Lee could feel the moment stretching, could see the intelligence in Sarah's eyes, and knew she was waiting for him to either come clean or dig deeper into the lie. He chose a third option, deflection. Maybe they just recognize good tippers, he said lightly. Maybe. Sarah's smile didn't reach her eyes. Or maybe your import and export business is more important than you're letting on. Does it matter? I suppose not. She finished her pastry, brushing crumbs from her fingers with careful precision. Your mother did ask me to keep an eye on you, after all. Not interview you. They sat in silence for a moment, drinking their coffee while the truth hung suspended between them like dust motes in afternoon light. Sarah knew he was lying. He knew she knew. And somehow, they'd both agreed without speaking to pretend otherwise. It should have felt dishonest. Instead, it felt like the beginning of something real. The parking garage was nearly empty at 11 p.m., just Sarah's beat-up Honda and the echo of her footsteps against concrete. She'd stayed late at the hospital, again double shift, emergency surgery that ran long. Her body ached, but her mind kept circling back to young Lee's text from earlier. Let me know when you're heading home. She hadn't responded. 4 weeks of coffee dates, and she still didn't know what they were doing. He showed up at the hospital with soup when she worked late. He remembered she took her coffee with 2 sugars and oat milk. He asked about her mother's treatment with genuine concern in his eyes. But he also disappeared for days at a time with vague explanations about business matters. The black sedan appeared in her rearview mirror 3 blocks from the hospital. It maintained the same distance through 2 turns, 3 stoplights. Sarah's hands tightened on the steering wheel. She told herself she was being paranoid. This was Los Angeles. Everyone drove black sedans. By the time she pulled into her apartment complex's underground garage, her heart was hammering. The sedan followed her in. Sarah's finger hovered over the emergency call button on her phone. The sedan's headlights cut off. 2 doors opened. She caught glimpses of broad shoulders, purposeful movement. Then a 3rd car roared down the entrance ramp. Young Lee's Tesla, tires screaming against concrete. It fishtailed to a stop between Sarah's Honda and the black sedan, and young Lee was out before the car fully stopped moving. What happened next took maybe 15 seconds, but Sarah's brain processed it in fragmented snapshots. Young Lee moving with efficiency that didn't match his tailored suits and gentle hands. The first man reaching for something under his jacket. Young Lee's elbow connecting with the man's throat. A gun clattering across concrete. The second man rushing forward. Young Lee pivoting, using the man's momentum to slam him face first into the sedan's hood. The sound of breaking bone echoed through the garage. Sarah sat frozen in her car, door still locked, as Young Lee zip-tied both men's hands behind their backs with materials he pulled from his pocket like he did this regularly. When he finally turned to her, his white shirt was speckled with someone else's blood. He tapped gently on her window. "You can come out. They're not going anywhere." Sarah's hands shook as she opened the door. Her legs felt disconnected from her body as she stepped out. One of the men was groaning, his nose clearly broken. The other was conscious but silent, his eyes tracking Young Lee's every movement. "Who?" Sarah's voice cracked. "What is this?" Young Lee kept himself between her and the two men. His breathing was steady, controlled, not even winded. "These men were sent to follow you, to see if you matter to me." "Do I?" The question escaped before Sarah could stop it. Something shifted in Young Lee's expression. "Yes, which is why this conversation is happening now instead of later." He glanced at the men, then back to her. "I need to make a phone call. 5 minutes. Then I'll tell you everything." Sarah watched as he stepped away, phone to his ear, speaking in rapid Korean. His tone was cold, authoritative. Nothing like the man who'd spent an hour helping her mother complete a crossword puzzle last Tuesday. When he returned, he positioned himself in front of her again, blocking her view of the bloodied men. "I'm not a businessman," Young Lee said quietly. "I'm the reason businessmen pay protection money." The parking garage suddenly felt too small, too cold. Sarah's medical training kicked in. She cataloged his injuries automatically. Bruised knuckles on his right hand, small cut above his left eyebrow, elevated heart rate visible in his neck. I run an organization, legitimate investments, mostly. Real estate, restaurants, import-export. But the foundation was built on less legal enterprises, and some of those operations still exist. People pay me for protection, for connections, for problems to disappear. He said it matter-of-factly, like he was explaining a business model. My father built this empire. I inherited it when I was 23, along with all the enemies that come with it. Sarah pressed her back against her car. 4 weeks. 4 weeks of coffee and conversation, and her mother asking when she'd bring that nice Korean boy around for dinner. "Why did you?" She gestured vaguely between them. "Why start this if you knew?" "Because you walked into my world accidentally and didn't see what everyone else sees. You saw someone who needed 7 stitches, not someone who owns half the city." Young Lee's jaw tightened. "And I'm selfish enough that I wanted more of that feeling." A black van pulled into the garage. 3 men got out, moving with practiced efficiency. They collected the zip-tied men without a word, loading them into the van. One handed Young Lee a wet cloth. He wiped the blood from his knuckles, never taking his eyes off Sarah. "What happens to them?" Sarah asked. "They get delivered back to whoever sent them with a message. No one touches you, ever." He balled up the cloth. "I have people watching your building now, your route to the hospital, your mother's care facility. You won't see them, but they're there." "I didn't ask for that." "I know, but it's non-negotiable now that they know you exist." The van pulled away, leaving them alone again. "You have 2 choices, Sarah. Walk away now, and I'll make sure you're protected from a distance. Or, Young Lee stepped closer, careful, like she was something fragile. "Or you let me explain everything, the whole truth. What I do, why I do it, what kind of life this is." His voice dropped. "And then you decide if you want me anyway." Sarah spent 3 days in her apartment with the curtains drawn, watching the light change on her ceiling and replaying every conversation they'd ever had. The coffee shop meetings took on new meaning now. The way he'd ordered plain black coffee and seemed surprised when she'd added cream to hers, like he'd genuinely never paid attention to something so small before. The questions he'd asked about her shift rotations, her patient load, the elderly woman in 4B who kept calling her sweetie, had any of it been real, or had he just been playing a part? Rich men were good at that, she figured. They spent their whole lives performing. Her roommate Maya knocked on her door twice a day with food Sarah barely touched. "You need to either go back and deal with this or delete his number and move on," Maya said on the third morning, setting down toast and eggs Sarah hadn't asked for. "But you can't live in this weird limbo where you're mad at him but won't actually confront him about it." Sarah stared at the ceiling. "What if I go back and he's not even there? What if the whole thing was just entertainment for him and he's already moved on to whatever rich people do next?" "Then you'll know," Maya said. "And knowing is better than this." The hospital felt different when Sarah walked through the sliding doors on day 4. She'd put on her scrubs at home, gone through all the familiar motions of tying her hair back and clipping her ID badge to her pocket, but her hands had been shaking the whole time. She told herself she was going back to work, that she needed the paycheck, needed the routine, needed to prove to herself that she wasn't the kind of person who let a man, any man, rich or otherwise, derail her entire life. But she knew that was only half true. She took the elevator to the 5th floor instead of the 3rd, where her shift was supposed to start. Her feet carried her down the hallway to room 512 before her brain could overthink it. The door was closed. She pressed her palm against it, feeling the cool metal, wondering if he was even in there or if he'd checked himself out the moment she'd left. Rich people didn't stay in hospitals longer than they had to. They had private doctors, home care, better options. She pushed the door open anyway. He was sitting up in bed, no longer hooked to the IV, wearing actual clothes now, jeans and a plain gray t-shirt that probably cost more than her monthly grocery budget, but looked ordinary enough. He turned when she entered, and the expression on his face wasn't what she expected. Not relief, not guilt, not the smooth charm he might have deployed to win her back. Just exhaustion. He looked like he hadn't slept either. "You came back," he said quietly. Sarah closed the door behind her and stayed near it, keeping distance between them like it might protect her from whatever came next. Her heart was hammering, but her voice came out steady. "I came back because I need to know something." He waited, watching her with those eyes that had seemed so honest in the coffee shop, so genuine when he talked about his mother's marinara sauce and the neighborhood he grew up in. All of it might have been true. All of it might have been lies. She couldn't tell anymore, and that uncertainty was eating her alive. "Did you lie about wanting to know me?" Sarah asked. "Or just about how you make money?" The question hung in the air between them. Outside the window, the city hummed with its usual chaos sirens. Construction, the distant rumble of the subway beneath the streets. Normal life continuing while Sarah waited for an answer that would determine whether the last few weeks had meant anything at all. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped together. For a long moment he just looked at her, and she forced herself not to look away. She'd spent 3 days running through every possible response he might give, preparing herself for smooth excuses or defensive anger or the kind of calculated apology rich men probably learned in business school. "The second one," he finally said. "I lied about the second, not the first." Sarah felt something crack open in her chest, not quite relief, not quite forgiveness, but something close to the beginning of understanding. She moved away from the door, took 2 steps closer, still not close enough to touch, but no longer holding herself at maximum distance. "Why?" The word came out rougher than she intended. "Because I'm tired," he said, and the honesty in it surprised her. "I'm tired of people seeing the money before they see me. I'm tired of women who show up already performing, already calculating. You looked at me like I was just some guy who couldn't afford his own medical bills, and it was the first real conversation I'd had in months, maybe years, and I wanted to keep it." Sarah crossed her arms. So you thought lying was better than giving me a choice about whether I wanted to deal with your money? No. He shook his head. I thought lying bought me time before everything changed. Before you started wondering if I was using you, or you were using me, or what everyone would think, or how much everything cost. I wanted more time in that space where none of it mattered. It matters now, Sarah said. Yeah, he agreed. It does. Minjun's hand trembled as he slid the envelope across Adrian's desk. The photographs spilled out like accusations Sarah leaving her apartment building in that navy coat he'd bought her last winter, Sarah at the corner cafe where she always ordered her morning latte, Sarah walking to work with her earbuds in, completely unaware of the lens trained on her back. Each image was time-stamped, recent, professional, terrifying. Adrian's jaw locked as he studied them, his fingers white-knuckled against the mahogany. When did these arrive? This morning. Delivered to the penthouse. Minjun's voice was hollow. They know everything, Adrian. Her routine, her favorite coffee shop, the route she takes to work. They've been watching her for weeks. The final photograph made Adrian's blood run cold. Sarah at her apartment window, silhouetted against the curtains, visible and vulnerable. Written across the bottom in neat black ink, "Trade Incheon for the girl, or we'll take both." Adrian's fist came down on the desk hard enough to rattle the crystal paperweight. They're threatening her. They're threatening Sarah to get to me. They're not threatening. Minjun met his gaze with grim certainty. They're promising. The triad doesn't bluff. You know that. They've already made their move by sending these. Now they're just waiting for your answer. Adrian stood abruptly, pacing to the window overlooking the city he'd built his empire in, the city that now felt like a trap closing around the one person who mattered. Below, people moved like ants through their ordinary lives, blissfully unaware that in boardrooms and back alleys, men were trading power like currency, and human lives were just another commodity. Incheon represents 40% of our Pacific shipping routes, Adrian said, his voice mechanical as his mind raced through calculations. If we give them that port, we lose our primary gateway to Southeast Asia. 6 months, maybe 8, and our entire Asian operation collapses. Thousands of jobs, billions in revenue. And if we don't give them the port? Minjun's question hung in the air like smoke. Adrian turned back to the photographs, to Sarah's face captured in dozens of unguarded moments, her smile as she thanked the barista, her distracted expression as she scrolled through her phone, the way she tilted her head when she was thinking. Every detail documented, every vulnerability exposed. They'll take her. The words tasted like poison, and then they'll take Incheon anyway. That's how they operate. They'll use her as leverage until I give them everything, and then, he couldn't finish the thought, didn't need to. They both knew what happened to leverage once it stopped being useful. Minjun moved to the bar cart, pouring 2 fingers of whiskey into a tumbler without asking. He set it in front of Adrian. There's a third option, which is, we move her. Tonight. New identity, new city, security details she'll never see but will always have. We make her disappear before they can touch her. Adrian's laugh was bitter. You think the triad won't find her? With their resources, their connections? We'd just be delaying the inevitable and making her a prisoner in the process. He picked up one of the photographs Sarah caught mid-laugh at something on her phone screen. She'd hate me for it, for taking away her life, her freedom, everything she values. Better alive and hating you than dead and having loved you. The brutal logic of it settled over Adrian like a shroud. He'd spent his entire adult life building an empire, learning to think 10 moves ahead, to sacrifice pawns to protect kings. But Sarah wasn't a chess piece. She was the only thing that had ever made him feel human instead of calculating. The only person who'd seen past the money and the power to whatever broken thing lived underneath. How long do we have? Adrian asked quietly. The message said, 72 hours. That was this morning. So, just under 3 days. 3 days to choose between his empire and his heart. 3 days to decide whether love was worth the cost of everything he'd built. 3 days to figure out if there was any move left on the board that didn't end in someone's destruction. Adrian gathered the photographs, stacking them with careful precision, as if order could somehow contain the chaos they represented. Call Chen. Tell him I want a meeting. Adrian. Tell him I'm considering his offer. But I want guarantees, documentation. I want every member of the Triad Council to sign off on Sarah's safety before I even think about transferring Incheon. Minjun's expression shifted from concern to something darker. You're actually considering giving them the port. I'm considering all my options. Adrian's voice was steel wrapped in silk, which includes finding out exactly who in the Triad Council authorized this move, who took these photographs, and who the hell thought threatening the woman I love was an acceptable negotiating tactic. He met Minjun's gaze directly. Because there's a fourth option you didn't mention. We find out who's responsible for this, and we make them regret ever hearing Sarah's name. We remind them why people fear the Blackwood name, and we make it very clear that some things aren't for sale at any price. Minjun's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Now that sounds like the Adrian Blackwood I know. Set up the meeting, tomorrow night, neutral ground. Adrian's hand closed around the photographs, crumpling them slightly. And Minjun? Double Sarah's security detail. I want eyes on her every second until this is resolved. She doesn't get a paper cut without me knowing about it. As Minjun left to make the arrangements, Adrian turned back to the window, the crushed photograph still in his hand. Somewhere out there in the city, Sarah was living her life, unaware that she'd become the center of a war she never asked to fight. He'd spent years learning that everything had a price. Now, he was about to find out what he was willing to pay to keep her safe. Young Lee's phone went dark 3 days ago. No calls, no texts, no midnight visits where he'd show up at her door with that careful expression that meant he'd been thinking too much. Sarah tried once, twice, then stopped counting. The silence felt deliberate, surgical, like he'd taken a scalpel and cut her out of whatever life he actually lived. On the fourth day, she took the subway to his office. The building downtown didn't look like much from the outside, gray concrete, tinted windows, the kind of place that could house accountants or money launderers and nobody would know the difference. But the lobby had that quiet hum of serious money, all polished marble and security cameras that tracked her from the moment she walked in. I'm here to see young Lee, she told the woman at the desk. The receptionist's smile never reached her eyes. Do you have an appointment? No, but he'll see me. I'm afraid Mr. Lee's schedule is completely. Tell him Sarah Mitchell is here. Tell him I'll wait as long as it takes. Something flickered across the woman's face recognition. Maybe, or surprise that anyone would use that tone in this building. She picked up the phone, spoke in rapid Korean, then gestured toward the elevators. 18th floor. Someone will meet you. The elevator ride felt like descending into cold water. Sarah watched the numbers climb, her reflection staring back from the polished doors, wrinkled scrubs, messy hair pulled into a knot, dark circles under her eyes from 3 nights of not sleeping. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman who'd been ghosted by someone who claimed she mattered. The doors opened to a hallway that smelled like expensive cologne and quiet threats. 2 men in dark suits stood waiting. Not security guards, something harder, more purposeful. Their eyes scanned her with the efficiency of people trained to identify weapons, weaknesses, exits. This way, one of them said. They walked her through a series of doors, each one heavier than the last, until they reached a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Young Lee stood at the far end, his back to her, phone pressed to his ear. He was speaking Korean, his voice low and sharp. The men took positions on either side of the door, not leaving, not even pretending to give them privacy. Young Lee ended the call and turned around. For a second, something crossed his face, relief, maybe, or pain, before the mask slid back into place. You shouldn't be here. You stopped answering my calls. I've been busy. For 4 days? Try again. He glanced at the men by the door, then back at her. Sarah, go home. This isn't... If you're ending this, have the guts to tell me why. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. I'm not a child. I deserve more than silence. Young Lee's jaw tightened. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila envelope, tossing it onto the conference table between them. Open it. Sarah's hands shook as she lifted the flap. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Her walking to work. Her on the subway. Her standing outside her apartment building, lit by the streetlight's yellow glow. In some of them, she was with young Lee. In others, she was alone, unaware she was being watched. The last photo made her stomach drop. It showed her through her apartment window, visible from the street, changing clothes in her bedroom. These were taken over the last 2 weeks, young Lee said quietly, by people who want to know what you mean to me, by people who will use you to get to me if they think it's worth the effort. Sarah set the photos down carefully, forcing herself to breathe. Who are they? Does it matter? There's always someone. A rival family, a business competitor, someone with a grudge or an agenda. He moved closer, his expression raw in a way she'd never seen. I cut contact to protect you. If they think you're nothing to me, they'll lose interest. You'll be safe. So, that's it? You decide I'm a liability and I just disappear from your life? You have a future, Sarah. Medical school. A career. A normal life where people don't follow you home and take pictures through your window. His voice cracked slightly. I won't let my world destroy that. Sarah looked at him. Really looked at him. At the exhaustion carved into the lines around his eyes. At the way he held himself like a man carrying weight no one else could see. At the loneliness he wore like armor. You're not protecting me, she said softly. You're protecting yourself from the guilt of what might happen, from having to trust that I can make my own choices. You don't understand. Then teach me. She stepped forward, closing the distance between them. Teach me how to survive your world. Teach me what to watch for, who to avoid, how to stay safe. Give me the tools, instead of making decisions for me. Young Lee stared at her. Sarah, or admit you're too scared to let me try. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Admit that you're the one who's afraid, not of them, of me, of what it means to let someone actually see you. The silence stretched between them like a wire pulled too tight. The men by the door shifted slightly, hands moving toward concealed weapons, but young Lee raised one hand, a small gesture that froze them in place. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. If you stay, there's no going back. You'll always be someone they can use against me. Always be a target. Always be looking over your shoulder. I know. I can't promise I'll always be able to protect you. I'm not asking you to. Sarah reached out, her fingers brushing his. I'm asking you to trust me, to believe that I'm strong enough to stand beside you instead of behind you. Young Lee closed his eyes. When he opened them again, something had shifted, some wall he'd been holding finally cracking. You're sure? I'm sure. He nodded slowly, then turned to the men at the door. Get her a security detail, 24-hour coverage, background checks on everyone in her building. I want camera feeds on every entrance to her apartment, and I want them monitored constantly. One of the men spoke up. Boss, that's going to draw attention. Then let it draw attention. Young Lee's voice hardened into something cold and absolute. Spread the word. Sarah Mitchell is under my protection. Anyone who touches her, looks at her wrong, even thinks about using her against me, they answer to me personally. He turned back to Sarah, and for the first time since she'd arrived, he let himself touch her fingers curling gently around her wrist, thumb tracing the pulse point there like he was making sure she was real. Welcome to my world, he said quietly. God help us both. The hospital parking garage was empty, except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant wail of an ambulance. Sarah clutched her discharge papers, relief flooding through her as she headed toward the exit. 3 more days of bed rest, the doctor had said. 3 more days of Young Lee hovering like a dangerous shadow, his presence both terrifying and oddly comforting. She didn't hear them until it was too late. The van screeched around the corner, side door already sliding open. Hands grabbed her before she could scream, rough, efficient, practiced. A cloth pressed over her mouth and nose, chemical sweet and suffocating. The world tilted sideways as her knees buckled, discharge papers scattering across oil-stained concrete like fallen leaves. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was the triad dragon tattooed on her attacker's wrist. Young Lee was in a meeting with his financial advisors when Min Jae burst through the door, face pale as death. The older man didn't speak, just held up his phone, playing the security footage that would haunt Young Lee for the rest of his life. Sarah. Taken. Gone. They sent demands, Min Jae said quietly, watching his boss's face turn to stone. 48 hours to surrender control of Incheon Port, or they start sending pieces of her back. Young Lee stood so abruptly his chair crashed backward. Around the conference table, advisors froze, recognizing the shift in the air the moment a calculated businessman transformed into something far more primal and deadly. 48 hours, he repeated, voice soft as silk and twice as dangerous. They want 48 hours. He pulled out his phone, dialed a number from memory. When the triad lieutenant answered, Young Lee's words were precise and cold as a blade between ribs. You have 6 hours. After that, I'm coming for her. And I'm bringing hell with me. The lieutenant laughed. Tough talk for a man who... Young Lee ended the call, turned to Min Jae. Call everyone. I want 60 of our best. I want 3 police vehicles. I don't care how you get them. And I want the Gangnam safe house location confirmed in the next 30 minutes. Sir, if we raid a triad stronghold in broad daylight, I wasn't asking for analysis. Young Lee's voice could have cut glass. I was giving orders. Min Jae nodded once, already dialing. He'd worked for Young Lee long enough to recognize when negotiation was off the table. This wasn't business anymore. This was war. Sarah woke to pain, sharp and immediate in her left side. The broken rib, she realized distantly, remembering the attack. But this was worse now, aggravated by however roughly they'd transported her. The room was windowless, concrete walls sweating moisture. A single bare bulb swung overhead, casting shadows that stretched and retreated like breathing things. Her wrists were zip-tied to a metal chair that had seen better decades. Ah, you're awake. The triad lieutenant, the one from the restaurant, she remembered stepped into the light. His smile was all teeth and no warmth. Good. I was worried we'd use too much chloroform. Your boyfriend is quite particular about keeping you intact. He's not my boyfriend, Sarah managed, hating how her voice shook. No? The lieutenant tilted his head. That's not what our intelligence suggests. Young Lee doesn't exactly have a history of charitable hospital visits. He circled her chair slowly, like a shark sensing blood. Here's what's going to happen. In 48 hours, your not boyfriend is going to hand over control of Incheon Port. If he doesn't, we'll start by breaking your other rib. Then we'll get creative. Sarah closed her eyes, fighting the wave of terror that threatened to drown her. She'd known, of course, that Young Lee's world was dangerous. But knowing it abstractly and living it were 2 entirely different things. He'll never give you the port, she whispered. The lieutenant's laugh was genuinely amused. Oh, sweetheart, you really don't understand, do you? Men like Young Lee don't negotiate over business. But you? He leaned close enough that she could smell his cologne, expensive and cloying. You? They negotiate over. 5 hours and 43 minutes after his ultimatum, Young Lee's convoy rolled up to the Gangnam safe house with the subtlety of an invading army. 3 stolen police vehicles, lights flashing, sirens wailing. 60 of his most loyal men, armed to the teeth, and operating under one simple directive: extract Sarah, eliminate resistance. The triad had been expecting negotiation, maybe a tentative rescue attempt under cover of darkness. They weren't expecting this, a full-scale assault in the middle of Seoul's wealthiest district, with fake police credentials and enough firepower to start a small war. Young Lee kicked in the front door himself. The firefight lasted 7 minutes, brutal, efficient, and utterly one-sided. Young Lee moved through the safe house like a force of nature, Min-jae at his shoulder, cutting through triad soldiers with the cold precision of a man who'd built an empire on violence and wasn't afraid to return to his roots. He found Sarah in the basement, zip-tied and bleeding from a cut above her eyebrow, clutching her ribs with her face twisted in pain. Their eyes met across the room. Sarah saw something in his expression that stole her breath. Not relief, not even anger. Something far more terrifying. Possession. Absolute, uncompromising possession. "You're mine," Young Lee said softly, cutting her restraints with a knife that still had someone else's blood on it. "And anyone who touches what's mine dies screaming." Sarah should have been horrified, should have run the moment her hands were free. Instead, as Young Lee lifted her carefully, so carefully, mindful of her broken rib, she felt something shift deep in her chest. This was his love language. Violence. War. Burning down the world for the people he claimed as his. And God help her. But she was starting to understand it. 3 months later, the urn sat on the mantel in perfect stillness, black lacquer, catching the morning light filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked a city Young Lee now controlled completely. His mother's ashes. He'd placed them there himself, the day they released her body, and every morning since, he looked at them first thing, not with grief anymore, with understanding. The kitchen smelled like coffee. Sarah moved through it with the easy confidence of someone who belonged there. Barefoot on marble that cost more per square foot than most people earned in a month. She wore one of his shirts, white cotton hanging loose on her frame, sleeves rolled to her elbows. Her hair was pulled back, no makeup. She looked more beautiful than the day he'd first seen her scrubbing his floor. Young Lee stood at the windows, hands in his pockets, watching the harbor. Cargo ships moved like chess pieces across water that glittered like broken glass. Every one of them paid tribute now. Every dock, every warehouse, every smuggling route from Busan to Seoul, the Triad's territory had been carved up and absorbed so thoroughly that within a month, people stopped saying the Triad's name at all. Behind him, Min-jun's latest reports sat stacked on the dining table. Thick folders bound in leather, each one a masterpiece of intelligence work. Witness statements, financial records, police rosters with annotations in red ink, marking which ones could be bought and which ones needed watching. The Iron Claw had built an empire of information, and Young Lee had inherited every file, every contact, every secret the old man had spent 40 years accumulating. Incheon was fortified now, not just controlled fortified. Young Lee had taken his mother's lessons and Min-jun's ruthless efficiency and built something the city had never seen before. Protection rackets that actually protected. Loan operations that didn't break kneecaps unless someone truly deserved it. Territory disputes settled with negotiation first. Violence only when negotiation failed. It wasn't mercy. It was strategy. Dead men couldn't pay tribute. Terrorized neighborhoods couldn't generate revenue. Fear was a tool, not a philosophy. The Triad had never understood that distinction. Sarah appeared beside him, pressing a mug into his hand. Black coffee, no sugar, exactly how he liked it. She didn't say anything, just stood there looking out at the same view, her shoulder touching his arm. Physical proximity that 3 months ago would have made him tense. Now it grounded him. Min-jun called, she said, finally. The last of the Triad lieutenants took the deal. He's cooperating. Young Lee nodded slowly. The lieutenant had been holding out, loyal to ghosts and old allegiances that meant nothing anymore. But everyone broke eventually. Everyone saw reason when the alternative was carefully explained. Good, he said. He wants to know if you're coming to the docks today. Some problem with the shipment from Taiwan. I'll handle it. Sarah sipped her coffee, still looking out at the harbor. Your mother would be proud of you. The words hit differently than they would have months ago. Back then, in that ICU room with machines breathing for his mother and her hand cold in his, he'd thought she was telling him to stop, to walk away from the violence, to become something softer, something safe. He'd thought Sarah was supposed to cure him, gentle touch and kind words, smoothing away the sharp edges until he was someone his mother could look at without shame. He'd been wrong. His mother hadn't wanted him to stop. She'd wanted him to understand why. Violence without purpose was just destruction. Power without reason was just cruelty. The Iron Claw had built an empire on fear alone, and fear made everyone your enemy eventually. But power wielded with precision, violence deployed with strategy that built something that lasted. And Sarah wasn't the cure for what he was. She was the reason for it. She knew, Young Lee said quietly. In that hospital, she knew exactly what she was doing. Sarah turned to look at him, coffee mug cradled in both hands. What do you mean? She didn't want me to change. She wanted me to have something worth not changing for. He met Sarah's eyes. Someone to build this for instead of just taking it. Understanding flickered across Sarah's face. She didn't argue, didn't protest that she wasn't worth violence or bloodshed or the systematic dismantling of rival organizations. She'd seen too much now, understood too much about the world they actually lived in versus the one people pretended existed. Is that what I am to you? She asked. A reason? You're the only reason that matters. Sarah held his gaze for a long moment, then looked back at the urn on the mantel. Then we better not waste it. Young Lee's phone buzzed. Minjun again, probably. The docks couldn't wait forever, and there were always fires to put out, always problems requiring his particular kind of solution. But for just this moment, he stood in his penthouse, with Sarah beside him and his mother's ashes watching over them both, and he understood finally what power was actually for. Not conquest, not fear, not revenge, purpose. He drained his coffee and set the mug down. Let's go to work. Thank you for sticking around with me, my wonderful story family. Before you go, I'd love to ask you for a small favor. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel. It helps me more than you can imagine and keeps these videos coming. The link is right below the video. Drop your location below. I want to know where my story family is watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one, and you don't want to miss it. See you in the next one.